Yo, what's happening? It's Johnny King, another episode of the Becoming Kings podcast. I'm even more excited probably than the first time I had this guest on the podcast because now we're actually buds and I've seen his just over a short period of time, his growth, his evolution. He's got a new book out. He's doing so many cool things. He was down in Central America doing yoga training, and now he's off to do public speaking. He's killing it. It's good to have Sam Kabert on, man. How are you?
Johnny King, thank you for having me back. I'm doing excellent. Yeah, man. Honestly, like it really hit me after I did my yoga teacher training in December of 2021. Like a
Yeah.
few weeks coming home from that, I was like, wow, I'm literally in the best place that I've been in my whole life. And I was just wrapping up the book, and now fast forward a few months later, now the book's out. So yeah, things are rolling, and it's a great time for
What I
sure.
what I loved about that though is when we talked about, I mean, when I had you on the first time, you're like, yeah, I'm gonna go down and do this, yoga teacher training, that sort of thing. I don't have any plans to, teach yoga, just going down for my own education, everything else. But then I also saw you a couple of weeks ago saying, hey, I'm doing yoga on the beach. It was kind of looked good. I was like, damn, I wish I lived there because I'd totally be there for you. So how's that been? Just kind of
Yeah,
improving your practice and stepping into a leadership role in that regard.
absolutely, man. And you've been an inspiration as well with your men's work. And for me, I forget exactly what happened, but there was a satsang sharing circle in our yoga teacher training, and I remember just being there, like one of two men in about an 18-person group, and the other guy, he was there mostly. I mean, I might be projecting, but his wife was there,
Mm.
so it wasn't like really the same caliber as everyone else when you go as a couple, and then also like, stereotyping, but a guy going with his wife as opposed to like, I was one of two men in an
Yeah.
18-person thing. And it
Yeah.
really hit me like, oh, when I get home, not only do I want to teach, which I didn't want to teach going
Mm.
into it. Not only did I not want to teach going into it, but like, yeah, or not like have interest. I didn't want to teach.
Yeah.
But yeah, I decided that night, I spoke into the universe that I do men's circles when I came back. And at the time of this recording, I'm going to have my first men's circle at the yoga studio here in town next Monday. So teaching
That's so
twice a
exciting.
week, and yeah, men's work. Yep.
And where are you again?
Santa Cruz, California.
I I knew that. I just asked the question for those that are listening. If you're in the Santa Cruz area, obviously hit Sam up if that sounds interesting to join. For those maybe that didn't catch the first episode that I had you on, maybe give a little bit of a background of your uh, going from, let's say, quote unquote, Silicon Valley, successful in business to kind of focusing more on truth seeking.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, very much workaholic, working in Silicon Valley and having my business, getting into content creation, doing nonprofit work on a couple boards, young professional events, things like that. And yeah, just kept grinding away, and eventually, hit rock bottom, a deep and dark depression and numbing depression, which led to an ayahuasca ceremony, which was something that was completely out of left field for me. And, just ceremony, spirituality, all the things. And then
Yeah.
after I did ayahuasca in 2019, I was like, show me everything. That started a podcast that is now Soul Seeker, and the release of my recent book, Soul Life Balance. But really, the past 3 years have just been a journey of going inward, of seeing what it means to go inward, and a thirst for spirituality with blinders on, not just the
Mhm.
content I was consuming, but the people I was engaging with.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. So the book is called Soul Life Balance, a guide to igniting and integrating spiritual awakenings. Let me ask you this first and foremost, because I noticed it. Why did you, at least in what I'm looking off of Amazon, why is soul capitalized and life balance isn't any, I'm sure there's a
Yeah.
reason behind
That's
that.
that's a great question. So, as many of you listening could probably guess, it's a reframe of work-life balance. And I
Mm-hmm.
just, as an aside, without going into the conditioning and programming of work-life balance, just like
Yeah.
look at it from this point of view, that the W in work comes before the L in life. A lot of times with phrases, not all the time, but typically it would be the letter that's closer to in the alphabet that's closer to an A. So it'd be like life work balance. So it's just like this subliminal programming of like, oh, putting work before your life, right? Because you're literally putting it before and how you say work-life balance, which is just absurd. So anyways, the reframe of soul life balance, that's the same reason why I'm calling it soul life balance and not life soul balance. And it's just a further emphasis of soul. Like, let's really make this clear. Like, it's about this connection to a higher self, spirituality, whatever it means to you. But, you know, it's no mistake that our society has suicide rates that are all-time high when we are made to fit in a mold of fear and victimhood and everything else that goes along with it, you know?
Yeah. What I appreciate that. And I think it opens the door to something that what I connect with you about is just your authenticity and your realness. And I feel like I attempt to do the same thing with my podcast too, which is like, man, I don't even pretend to act like I have my shit together. And you talk about, you know, just kind of helping spread awareness around various practices that help tackle the bigger issues of sitting with discomfort or getting through anxiety or depression. And yet, you know, before you started recording, you're saying I'm at times I'm still struggling with that too. What are some of the things that you speak about in the book that can help people, you know, if they're just new to listening to you for the first time? What are some of those tactics or tips, or, you know, I hate all those buzzwords, but things that you can do to get through some of the depressive or the, you know, the heavy thinking that we all sometimes can get into when we overanalyze life?
One of the biggest things for me has been to really get in touch with my awareness and just to really slow down. And it was designed that way. You know, I've had so many experiences in the past few years that like they were just massive signs for me to slow down, from getting T-boned in my car by a tractor and my car getting totaled to biting into a piece of pasta and my front left tooth cracking and it falling out, to, you know, a brand new bike breaking down for no reason at all. Like all these little things that add up and just different things. It just comes down to awareness. And for me, what's been so powerful is connecting to my intuition through the signs and synchronicities. And even, you know, a few years ago, I would have a few friends where we had an active thread going, a text thread going all the time. And I was always sharing like these synchronicities, and not that they're not happening now. I mean, I'm in a different season now where I'm very much more in the life side of that yang energy and like more structure and outward and external. I was in a season of inward, and it reflected in terms of all of the magical synchronicities that were all happening. But we can't really do anything with those if we aren't slowing down, if we aren't tracing our thought patterns and things like that. So there's simple things like reflection. You know, I think a lot of people get caught up in like, oh, I'm not a good meditator. Oh, you know, like I don't meditate the right way. I think there's a lot to be said to just like gazing outside, not specifically looking at anything. It could be sun gazing and just reflecting and pondering on something. And instead of meditation. One more thing is this need to do, right? We approach spirituality when we're new into this stuff, at least like, oh, did I meditate? Did I do breath work? Did I journal and all this stuff? And by approaching it as a to-do list, it actually counteracts the whole purpose of the practice itself. So I think, you know, relieving the shame and the stories and all that type of stuff of needing to do this and how we treat ourselves if we don't do it, you know?
Right. Let me rewind back. You said I guess it gives the new, or it goes to the heart of the definition of al dente. So pasta. Pasta. You had pasta that was al dente so much that it shattered your tooth. That's some good pasta or some really bad pasta.
Dude, that was one of the weirdest experiences of my life, bro. Like I was already like not in good spirits and I was on a downward spiral. I don't know what was going on in my life. I don't remember, but I think I had like a weed mint, which I don't really do cannabis much. I'm one of those people that likes the more like profound medicines, but doesn't really love cannabis. One of those. But yeah, every now and then I'll have some cannabis. I think I was high that night and I just was like feeling lazy and just like, let me watch a movie and DoorDash some food, like just one of those moods. And the food came in and I've always been one that to eat too quick. Like I've been working on slowing down, not just inhaling my food. But what happened was I bit down, it was like penne pasta or something. And my tooth went straight through the noodle to the fork. And I didn't crunch down the fork. Like, I don't even know what happened, but my tooth, like I have pictures, it's ridiculous. And I remember I have a picture of myself with a selfie, like you can see them stoned and greasy pasta all over my face with the missing tooth. And I'm just like, what? I felt like my life was over, like it's the first reaction. But it was then. Yeah. So that's one thing. I'll let you take it. Yeah.
Well, the other thing is my where my mind went when you said you got T-boned by a tractor, like a legit tractor, like a farmer driving down the road in his tractor.
Yeah, I was going to bring that one up next. So I grew up in Gilroy, which is the garlic capital in the world. And it's about an hour away from where I live in Santa Cruz. My parents still live there. I was visiting my parents and then I was driving on the country roads home. And it was such a weird experience because I saw this tractor up on the right, maybe, I don't know, maybe 50 yards ahead on the right. And he would have been backing out, but he wasn't moving. I saw him look at me. I looked at him. And then as soon as I'm starting to like pass him, probably going, 40 miles an hour, give or take. I saw him inching out. So I slammed on the brakes. And I'm pretty sure the fact that I slammed on the brakes is what did it, because he hit the passenger side back seat where my dog was in her crate. Like he came close to her. She's fine. But yeah, so I remember that happening and just being like, what just happened? And then I pulled over and my first thought was, what's the lesson? And like in hindsight, in reflection, that's how like I get spirituals just thinking about it. But like it's these times of situations like that when I've been able to react and have this out of body experience to just on autopilot ask myself, be like, what's the lesson? That's where I'm like, oh my God, like the work I'm doing is actually making a difference. Versus I even got out last part and I saw the car bashed in and I looked at it and I had a thought that was like, oh, I'm supposed to say, what the fuck? So I go, what the fuck? And then I go, that didn't feel right. And I instantly went back to like, what's the lesson? And it was just this really weird experience for sure.
It's interesting because you had said before, I mean, as you're telling the various tractor T-boning and the El Dente story, that you really said all about the awareness piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of my questions that I want to get to in a second is, maybe helping those that are listening, maybe they're not even aware of what the awareness piece is. Mm-hmm. But having said that, I think it's pretty cool to I was just going to acknowledge you in the sense that, clearly you're doing the work. You're aware enough because you said you were reacting, but really you were responding. Like the reaction would have been, what the fuck? Mm-hmm. The responding was, what's the lesson in this? Which is probably one of the most profound questions any one of us could take as if you could habitually ask that question, of like, and I often do too, like I'll break up with a relationship, be like, okay, what was some of the biggest lessons I learned from this? Right. Or I fail at something, like, well, what's the lesson? And I learned that from Tony Robbins, which I think is a lot better of a question than, why did I fail? Or why am I so stupid? Or, why did I just get hit by a tractor? That sort of thing. So speak, if you don't mind, a little bit more to that awareness piece. And what actually is awareness?
Yeah, I think what comes up for me is like the whole concept of this is happening for us versus
Yeah.
to us, and that's kind of like how I've reprogrammed the neural pathways in my brain to
Mm.
just be on the positive side. Um, your question was about awareness. How do you drop it into awareness? And I do think in a roundabout way that it is the practice of soul life balance. And this is something I've been trying. And it's like when I'm someone who's done a lot of medicine work, right, in the past few years. And it's important to know that taking the medicine is just 10%. The integration is 90% of where the work lies,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
We all know that and say that, but then it's actually embodying that. And what does that look like? Well, if you just go back to the way your life was, then what's the point, right? If you're not making these changes. And this is the hard part that I've seen myself and other people. It's like, where do you make the time to do your spiritual practices? And then also like I just mentioned in terms of, oh, I gotta check off all these things. It doesn't need to be like that. It can be as simple as walking around your neighborhood earthing without shoes on, or gazing out at nature, being in nature, or looking at your thoughts. But all these different types of practices that we do talk about, it's just like, okay, how can we bring them in on a daily basis? I just want to make sure that I'm connecting with myself. And through over time, you'll build awareness. I'm not sure that there's like one way to get somewhere with anything. And the same applies with awareness.
Well, how is awareness and intentionality different? I kind of see that there's like a
Mm.
relationship between the two, but they're not the same,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, we could take the breath, right? Like how many times in a day do we take an intentional breath? Most people zero. Like that's just the truth. Even for myself today, I'm not sure if I've really taken a few intentional breaths. I've not done yoga clearly. It's different than if you're going on a run or you're working out and you're breathing deeper. Intentional breath is to connect with it. And it can be as simple as like box breathing, right? Now, the awareness might be for myself in reflection. And this is the way my brain works, right? Like, I'm like, okay, well, if I haven't taken an intentional breath today, why not? Well, what's going on today so they do relate to each other. That's just one example that was top of mind.
Yeah, and I was thinking too, like, I think I'm brought into awareness when I get intentional, right?
Yeah.
And you know, the other way around. I also can't be aware if I'm not being intentional. Like they kind of need to be both present in some regards. And I think that's a really good example, because you're right. Like breath is such a good one where it's something we just take for granted. We do every single day. It just happens kind of, subconsciously. And yet, man, do I feel instantaneously different when if I'm in different men's groups and we start off with a 1 minute meditation, which I've incorporated now into my men's groups. It's just like, let's just start off with a 1 minute meditation as a grounding. And I immediately feel different just because I'm breathing fuller and I'm focused just on my breath. I'm letting everything else go. And I think there's a lot of power there, but there's a lot to be said also, like you said, about just breath work,
Mhm.
and awareness and intentionality. So my next question kind of gets back into your book. If you don't mind, maybe get into the weeds a little bit in terms of how is it laid out in terms of table of contents? What if someone's reading your book, what's the structure, what's the expected journey, if you will, through your book? I'd love to kind of dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've done probably similar to you as an author, people listening, like so many different mind maps on this thing. And, initially as well, the concept for the book was going to be very basic. And I don't want to say basic, it was more like a spirituality 101 for those that might be like spiritual curious that are workaholics realizing there's something more. And then through the writing process, it just got deeper and deeper and deeper. And it got to the point where like at some point I think I was at my yoga teacher training and I realized how many of my peers were asking me different topics. And I was like, wow, they're not familiar with like, a despacho ceremony or a new moon or full moon ceremony, or, whatever the case, the specific thing was, where I was like, I can't just assume that people know this stuff. I need to include this. So it was actually really cool to be in this tight knit community with other people on the spiritual path for 21 days in a row, where I would talk about different stuff and be like, oh, is that in the book? And then I went as far to talk about ETs, extraterrestrials. And it wasn't that I was leaving that topic out of the book, but a lot of people know like that's one of the specific things I'm interested in. Does it really relate to integrating spiritual awakenings? It depends. For me, my first rabbit hole was I want to know everything about the human origin story, So I think it is. And, it's very much a choose your own adventure. But I had the book right here in front of me. And what's interesting is it's broken down in 4 sections. And the first section is about a third of the book. And that section is all about unprogramming. And I think you and I both know, and a lot of people listening to your podcast, that there's so much conditioning and programming in our society. From there, it gets into what is spirituality anyways. And that's kind of like, the 101 type stuff. And I don't want to say 101 because it's, I talk about soul contracts, which is, pretty deep, inner child healing and shifting timelines, all kinds of stuff like that. And then obviously ETs. So that stuff really isn't 101 at all. But, the basic concept started with it being 101. And then from there, from workaholic to inner freedom is another section. And the last section is a blueprint to building a new outer world. Because one theme in the book is really exploring the concept of if the outer world is a reflection of our inner world, then maybe all we need to do is just focus on self-love in our inner world. And that's a big theme of the book.
Yeah, amen to that, which I think it's interesting that that's how you wrap it up, because that's kind of how you started. So much of the programming that we've, had instilled in us is leads to unhappiness, or going down the rabbit hole, or the hamster wheel, or like you said, the being a workaholic, thinking that someday once we achieve something, then we'll be happy, right? And a lot of that unprogramming leads to not a whole lot necessarily has to change, although I'm sure it'll change on the outside, but like a ton needs to change obviously on the inside for you to get there. So it's cool that you kind of have those as what do you call that? Bookends. Thank you. And then have all the good meat on the inside,
Well, yeah. And actually awareness too, that comes back to awareness, right? Like for me, it was kind of like, I've been chasing all these goals for years and years, but whose goals were they? I never had the awareness to sit with myself to really, really like I did in terms of like, what is my why? And oh, this is my driving why, but like not the layer deeper than that,
Yep.
So
my first initiation of that was at a Tony Robbins event. And, we all have our different, I mean, it could have been ayahuasca for you. It could be Tony Robbins for me. It could be a podcast or a book for someone else. Or just, an awakening on your own. And I think for me, it was around that time that I was 30, and just really coupled with like, who actually like chose these things that I'm going after? Because, and it really happened when I went through my divorce. I kind of questioned like, why was I fighting so hard for this, basic life anyways, like she didn't want to be a part of it. And actually I didn't either. Right. So it was a good wake up call, really good wake up call. But I think a lot of us fall into that. And I think men, again, it's kind of comes back to that kind of midlife crisis, whether you go through it in your 40s or you go through it in your 20s or 30s or later on in life, it is kind of more of the questioning of, and having the awareness to question why are we doing all this anyways, and what's the purpose of this human life? If it's just to acquire things, which we all know we're not going to be able to take with us. Right. So what is it really all about? What does your book, does it go into,
I talk about,
Yeah.
Oh, purpose. Yeah. I thought you were going to ask about materialism and consumerism, but yeah.
Well, on one side of the coin that, but then on the other side of the coin, like if it's not about that, then what is it all about? Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So early
Soul
on
side.
in unprogramming, I talk about consumerism and materialism, and not to bash it. Like consumerism would be to feed the machine, right? That's like Amazon. And there's just, uh, small, and I'm not suggesting, I'm not one of those people who is like out with pitchforks and really has like a strong take on, shop. I don't want to say shop local, but because obviously I believe in all this stuff, but it's not like, the thing that I'm sitting here really talking a lot about. It's more subtle shifts that, yes, I purchased from Amazon. My book is on Amazon. My parents have an office supply company in Silicon Valley, and they're the last independently owned office supply company in Silicon Valley, and they battle Amazon. This is their livelihood for over 40 years has been their business. So there's I have personal things with Amazon. Yet I have Amazon on my browser right in front of me, and my book's on there. And it's just these small things where if we can accumulate more things in our shopping cart, right, as opposed to just, oh, let me check out with one thing, and then they have an option for I actually don't talk about any of this in the book. I don't know why I'm talking about Amazon right now. I talk about consumerism in such a different way, but it's the point being that it's a necessary evil that feeds the machine, right? And we could go unpack that. Materialism is different in that we're looking for these goods, kind of like what you just alluded to fill an internal void. We're looking for an external thing. And at the same right, like, I mean, I have nice stuff and all that. And I bought a brand new car right after doing ayahuasca and seeing all this. And then I was upset, shaming myself for it. So I've lived through like all the different iterations that I feel, not all of them, but different iterations where it was like, okay, now I went against what I believe. Now I'm shaming myself. Oh no, it's okay because this is part of what it means to be a human. And I shouldn't, not enjoy nice things because, now I'm building a new relationship back to awareness. I'm tracing my thoughts being like, oh, it's okay for me on this car. I'm not letting this car define me and it be a source of happiness, right? Things like that. And then the other part of it was soul purpose. Now, towards the end of the book, I do have quite an important rant for me about purpose, mission, and dharma. And in spirituality, we talk about soul purpose, we talk about your mission and dharma. All these things mean basically the same thing. And it's always been triggering. And I didn't know why until one day it hit me in a medicine ceremony that it is so external, right? If so much of spirituality is about like realizing external pressures, now all of a sudden we're putting more pressure on people to find their purpose. And people are, I've seen so many people scramble and do things and put them out to the universe. And it's for this external need and something they feel like they should be doing, even though they're the same people that don't like the word should, right? And what I've come to realize is it's really just all about self-love. And I don't know about you or anyone listening, but I don't think, and this is me projecting because I'm not actually in people's minds and hearts, but I don't think I know anyone who 100% unequivocally loves themselves, right? And if the outer world is truly a reflection of the inner world, and there's only one person that truly needs to wake up, then instead of all these external factors of how am I going to make a difference in the outside world, why are we not talking about self-love and making a difference in your internal world first? Then at that point, you can talk about like mission, things to do. But I don't know. I still dance with, if I truly loved myself to my fullest capability, would that shift the entire world outside, and it's starting to, so.
Yeah, I think that's that, but that also might be just the journey of this experience, this human experience, is kind of like living through that, through this dream that its purpose is kind of to like, put these lies on us or try to label us or fit us into a box. And then all we're up against are all these trials where we're attempting to disprove all of those lies and focus on the truth, and the truth is that we're all loved and we are loved. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like last night I was at a men's book club, and a bunch of the guys, someone asked the question, hey, who here knows their superpower? Who knows their purpose? And half of us kind of raised our hands, and the other, like, who has an idea but isn't totally clear, was the other guys. But I could tell there was this kind of the energy shifted, because it all of a sudden kind of cut the group in half, right? And there was kind of a shame towards the guys who are they're showing up, they're doing the work. But it's like, oh man, I don't know my purpose yet, or I don't know my superpower. I'm like, man, sometimes, I agree with you. There's almost so much emphasis on finding one's superpower or life purpose that we get stuck in that. Again, the part that could be part of the programming too, is that you need to know all these things and, to be enlightened or whatnot. But I think to some degree, there's a part of letting go, which probably comes with self-love, that helps the process of just being, versus like doing the work of trying to find, is still in that doing energy of searching for my purpose, And
we don't need more,
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't need more. We don't need more. We don't need me to come out with, another book. We don't need my podcast or your podcast or any of this. Like, we have everything within.
Agreed.
Right.
Agreed.
And that's kind of the paradox of being a content creator. Right.
Yeah.
So,
well, I still think of all the content that I create, and the book that I, wrote, and the podcast is still, if anything, it's just more like a journal or a time capsule of my process of my own work, and people are just joining me for the journey that they're on, and we're kind of saddling up next to each other and doing the work together, which is more fun than doing it by ourselves,
Yeah, I agree with you. And I actually look at my stuff very similar, but not to bring your and my content into this. And what I meant by like, we don't need more is like at the end of a medicine ceremony, when I get to that space of like realizing like with content and consumption, not of material goods per se, but of like thought space, like really it, like you just talked about, letting go. It's about less and all this. And I'm not saying we have all the answers to the universe within us, but maybe we do.
I think we do. I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think everything that we need is already within us. And that's why I think this human experience, and I think plant-based medicine, the little bit that I've done, but each time I do it, it's coming to my own truths. I'm like, there's the aha and the realization that whatever I just ahaed about, I actually already knew as truth.
Yeah. Totally.
And I'm like, oh shit. Like, I knew this, I felt this. I just hadn't connected it, or I hadn't owned it, or, like, I know I am lovable, and yet plenty of times I don't feel it. Right. Mm-hmm. But that's the yin and the yang, or the pull against truth sometimes. Right. Mm-hmm. So having said that, I think that still the profound part of your book and your message, I feel like, is the 10% of the journey is like doing the work, and 90%, well, doing the work, that's not the right term, but 90% of it is integrating, right? Is the integration. No different than, maybe we talked about this on the last time I had you on. It's like, I've had surgery, or I get injured, and then maybe you get put back together, they'll do some work on you, but no one tells you how to rehab. No one tells you how to, like, I had hernia surgery in my abs, and like for a year and a half, I was struggling because no one gave me any type of clue as to how to rehab from like abdominal surgery. But I'm like, that was 90% of the challenge, was healing from that, and then getting the use of my core back. And I kind of think about it in the same sense, like, you can go through personal development, or you can have a major trauma go on, or go through a plant-based ceremony, but then there is not as much support in the integration part, right? Mm-hmm. So what are some of the things that you talk about in your book, if you don't mind sharing, that are kind of guides, again, to helping people realize the goodness of doing, the ceremony or whatever, right? They're
Mhm.
having their spiritual awakening, but then making sure that they get they're wringing the most juice out of it as possible versus leaving potential on the table, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I share a ton of modalities that I use personally, and it's not like all the traditional ones you would be thinking of. Like if you're thinking of the traditional ones, then yeah, I probably have that in there. But then there's more stuff like, for example, soul contracts. I'm really into the concept of soul contracts, and the Pixar movie Soul illustrates it pretty well in terms
That's a
of
good
like,
movie.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, so
And
good.
I was going to bring that up earlier with purpose, like not to any spoilers, but I mean, by the end of the movie, spoiler alert, hit pause.
Yeah,
But it's kind of just like experiencing,
yeah,
right? Isn't that
yeah.
the whole purpose? So, anyways, there's a lot of different things. I talk about soul contracts, which is like before you incarnate, choosing which souls you'll come in with, and then that explains more whether it's a partner or it's a friend or a family member of like why something isn't working, or if a loved one lost, like it's something that was predetermined. Essentially, that's very high level. You could check out the book Sacred Contracts by Carolyn Mace. It's an incredible book. I recommend it on Audible, and she goes deep into it. She uses Helen Keller as a great example of like how she all that. And then spirit guides and animals, messengers, listening to the whispers, things like that. That's a little bit more common. What else is there? Integration. So I mean, the whole book is about it, and I try to put as much in it of topics that I'm interested in. Like just the other day, I realized something wasn't in it, and I go, "Yeah, but that doesn't really interest me." So that makes sense why that wasn't in there. But like even at the yoga teacher training, it was in Nasara in Costa Rica, and one of the girls there I was friends with was having trouble with something without getting to specifics, and she needed to let go. So I taught her what a despacho ceremony was, and I showed her how like you could pick up a seashell in the ocean, your body will respond if that's like a yes or a no, and you can feel it, and just listening to your body, and then giving it back to nature, and how that's a gesture, it's an offering, and it's also like the physical representation of letting go. So there's things like that in there too. Like there's so many different ways to integrate, and really that's what the book is about. At first, it, like I mentioned, it was going to be more of just like a mindset shift and like a very much intro, where now it's like after doing so much medicine and things like that, seeing that, oh, I'm kind of tired of being like, oh, happy integrating, on either side I'm on, yeah. One thing I feel called to do at some point is an integration retreat where there's no medicine, and it's bringing in experts at different modalities, and really like really diving in deep with these people about the practices so that they can take it home.
Yeah. For someone maybe that this is all kind of new to them, define real quick what you mean by modalities.
Oh, good point. Practice modality, practice like breath work would be a practice, or cold therapy, like a cold plunge. That's an excellent way to practice the art of surrender, different things like that. Or even yoga. Oh, that's what I was going to say. Yoga. At the very beginning of the book, I talk about the 8 limbs of yoga, and one of the limbs is are the asanas, the postures. And that's what most of us think of yoga. We think of it as movement in the postures. Well, that's just 1/8 of what yoga has to offer. So I talk about the 8 limbs of yoga, and it's interesting in talking about it, I realized, wow, if one were to just practice all the 8 limbs and just abide by that alone, that is going to lead you to a spiritual awakening and its integration. So
Yeah, I just cut out for a quick second there. I'm glad you're still with me, but I got the majority of that. I would say I wouldn't say, but I would question again, of all the modalities that you speak of in the book, if someone is again new to integrating, what would be one of the well, and maybe is there even like a beginner modality that you would recommend people getting into? That's a kind of a, again, if this is kind of new to someone, I'm just thinking about one of my guys on they listened to he's like, this sounds really interesting. I'm intrigued, but I'm also kind of intimidated or overwhelmed. Like, what would be a good place to start?
Yeah, I wouldn't even recommend meditation. For me, it's all about reflection. I saw Adi Shanti speak recently a few years ago. He's a spiritual teacher, and he talked about the lost art of porch gazing, where there's no agenda. It's just looking out and seeing what's there. And even in my time in Nasara in Costa Rica, like the whole town congregates on the beach together for the sunset, and everyone is there, and they literally build their days around the sunset. It's one of the four, I think, blue zones in the world, which a blue zone is like a healthier place of living. People are healthier, they live longer, things like that. So I think something simple that anyone can really do without there being a barrier to entry, either on accessibility or their quote unquote skill level, for lack of a better way to put it, is just connecting with the elements of nature and reflecting. And it could be a sunset, it could be a sunrise, or it could be as simple as going on a walk without your phone, or maybe with your phone but not listening to a podcast, not listening to Audible, not texting, not emailing, and just connecting with everything around you, and just listening to the birds chirp and listening to different sounds and feeling the sensations on your skin. Like that is the art of awareness right there. And this is my whole point that I like to talk about a lot. Like, it doesn't have to be meditation, journaling, and all these things. It can be as simple as just, reflection and being in the elements and connecting and getting curious. So
I think that's really, really good, because I do feel like a lot of the things that let's just say one of the times that I was in the Cayman Islands on 7 Mile Beach and watching the sunset, sitting on the beach, kind of right at the edge of the shore, as the small little waves are rolling in, no cell phone, it's like feeling the warmth of the sun, listening kind of to the lapping of the water, feeling the sand in between my toes, experiencing loved ones by me, and just appreciating the shit out of life, versus I could be sitting there stressed about business or just so not present. Right. But you don't have to be in the Cayman Islands to enjoy that moment. You're saying being more intentional with going for a walk or just sitting on the porch and looking out. Right. So I think that's a really good point and a good beginner spot to be. And now on the flip side of the coin, talking to someone who's maybe done a lot of work, are there certain modalities that you believe for someone who's done a lot of the work that are really provoking in I would say in a good way of growth and experience, if you will, for someone who's done a lot more that maybe they haven't heard of different modalities that you talk about in the book? Is there anything that would be more for a seasoned individual?
For me, it's breath work. And when I say breath work, I mean what's being called these days as a breath work journey, because it's very misleading when you say breath work. Like, what does that mean? And people that are not familiar with breath work, let's say it this way. For people that are familiar with breath work, you may be thinking when I say breath work, I'm talking about like box breathing for 5 minutes or alternate nostril breathing, which if you're not familiar, those are great practices that oftentimes in like yoga, you'll do at the beginning or the end, or, maybe in a men's circle, something like that. And they're good ways to take a few intentional breaths to just like get in resonance with each other and just to kind of, drop into your nervous system. It's a great practice. Absolutely. However, a breathwork journey is entirely different, where it's basically a medicine ceremony without the medicine. And you're intentionally breathing for at least like 60 minutes nonstop. And there's different schools of thoughts in terms of how to do it, but a breathwork journey will naturally release DMT from your body. And these can be very profound experiences. I used to do breathwork journeys about 3-4 times a week, especially if it was before or after a medicine ceremony. I did breath work, I think once last week, a breath work journey. But other than that, I haven't done one in probably a couple months. I'm trying to, like I said, I'm in a different season now where now it's more external, right? But that said, I've had some of the more profound experiences and maintain that frequency by implementing breath work into my routine. I wouldn't recommend doing it every day. You certainly can, but I think keeping up with it, a couple times a week would be really great for sure.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you something. This just my own personal question, but I bet you I'm not the only one who feels this way. When we're talking about breath work or, well, let's just, various modalities, if you will. Anytime once I get into it, I'm like, oh, this is amazing. It's so worth it. I just naturally feel, and maybe it's not natural. I tend to feel a resistance to doing some of these things. Like they just don't feel masculine to me. I just feel kind of like, and I have to surrender to that every single time. But there's a part of me that wants to go out and fucking chop wood or shoot guns but I know that stuff doesn't work. And it's just like me asking my coach last year, Christine Hasler, like, she's like, you need to grieve after this relationship. I was like, can I just go down to smash it down in Southern Denver and just smash shit? She's like, it's very cathartic, but it's not going to move the energy up and out of you. When I get into breath work, then potentially comes tears and maybe that's really what I'm avoiding is I don't want to I'm scared to drop into those uncomfortable emotions, but there's always that resistance. I'm like, man, I don't know. I don't want to fucking do this. It feels very like airy fairy, so to speak,
Yeah.
So what would you say to that? Is that my own resistance? Is it something that you've been up against or anything that comes up with other conversations with men or women? Right.
Yeah. I think there's a few things there. Cause I think, if I'm hearing you right, it's kind of a combination of one, facing it, and two, kind of from outward perception of, oh, this isn't masculine. Like, I don't want to do this. It's kind of both. It sounds like, is that right?
Yeah. And even on top of that, I just feel like, I'm drawn to, I'm just kind of drawn more to like, maybe this thing, I just want to do something more where sitting and being with yourself is just like, and maybe more that's again, the patterning of just being a human doer, versus being a human being, like just to sit and slow down. Like I said, I always feel like so much better, but there's like that, I don't know if I want to take the time to do that. I'm sure I'm just up against my own patterns.
Yeah. I'll speak from my experience. And for me, like, I did yoga in college a couple times, like at the gym, coming back from a snowboard trip, things like that, where I was really sore. I wanted to stretch. That was my intention. And I remember like my guy friends being outside the window making fun of me and afterwards. And, I was in the top frat, lived above the most popular bar, and, a lot of jocks, I was never a jock, but around that, and I was a meathead without being an athlete, like just personality wise, very broy. And I hadn't practiced yoga in years. In 2018, I heard Rogan talking on his podcast, Joe Rogan, about yoga and how challenging it is and all the benefits from it. I was like, oh, maybe I'll try that again. So really, for me, it's been like this, the metaphorical permission slip from leaders and manly men like Rogan, like yourself, doing the work like myself. We're giving the permission slip to other guys to break down this paradigm, because that's one part of it, right? It's I know, like myself, I have crystals and all this stuff that's like women stuff. And, I like doing the full moon, new moon ceremonies. I don't do them all the time, but I'm into a lot of stuff that women are into. And I've had to like really face that. And at the end of the day, like for me, I like the way it makes me feel, and I was at such a place after doing ayahuasca of just so curious. If I did not follow my curiosity and do the things that made me uncomfortable, like going to a full moon ceremony, not even knowing what that meant, or it was a new moon ceremony, but being like, I feel called to this and not knowing what feeling called means. Just like I didn't feel like I was doing it. It just like happened. And I've kept going that way. And, in a lot of ways for where I'm at now, like my take in terms of men's work for me is kind of like that invitation for men to soften and get into the feminine, and for me, it's not so much like, oh, I don't want to feel this per se, because I do like feeling it. I do like the deeper type of stuff like that, but I still do have like, oh, are people gonna think I'm like, soft because I'm a yoga teacher now, or whatever the case may be,
Yeah. I appreciate that vulnerability and transparency, because I think that's probably what just a lot of guys are up against that too.
So we have to embody it, leaders
yeah.
like you and myself, at least myself, we're the bridge,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I'm happy to do that. I do feel like even when I'm at seminars and we're doing carpet work or different types of trauma work, it's like, there's always that, I don't want to go there, but I know I need to, and maybe that.
For me, that comes up when I'm like, oh, everything's good. Like, no, I don't want to do that right now. That's kind of like when it comes up. Yeah, for sure. I feel that. Yeah. And I, in terms of social situations, I get so much anxiety in social situations. And, if one thing that the pandemic and the lockdowns like have gifted me personally is to not give into that societal conditioning of, oh, it's the weekend, I should be hanging out with people, and just being okay by myself, and actually realizing like, oh, now that I don't have all these voices about like, oh, you're a loser, whatever, because you're not out doing something, I actually much rather prefer most of the time being by myself than with a decently sized group of people,
Yeah. Interesting. Which again, I'm sure that understanding is cultivated from doing the work of being connected, being aware, being connected to, your body, how it really feels, versus judging yourself and everything else that we do, so I think there's a big part of that guys can really lean into, which sounds more feminine, or more like what women are good at, is like really connecting with their heart. And like, we can kind of poo-poo that, but man, there's so much there, like you said, of just really feeling like, and you feel that way with meeting other people, you just instantly trust someone, or you just energetically don't, I think men can connect with that, like businessmen. Some days you just feel great, you get out of bed, and other days you just feel off, so there's a lot of that where I think we take for granted, being connected to our energy source on the inside, but then we kind of just slough it off, and we just kind of man our way through it, versus really cultivating a little bit more of a slow down. How am I feeling? Why am I feeling that way? How can I shift things, using maybe this a little bit more of the integration practices that you were talking about?
One thing that just came up for me is I haven't listened to metal in like 15 years, but in high school I was a metalhead, and I've gotten back into metal in the past couple of months. And there's this song by a band called Motigrator, and they're like a really heavy metal band, but I forget how it goes, but it's basically like, I'm just a little bit off today. And and it's so funny, like looking at the lyrics, and Master of Puppets by Metallica, like that one is all about like society, not conditioning, but all that type of stuff. The song title gives it alone. Anyways, but there's so many different songs where I find these lyrics are just like so mindful and conscious, and kind of like what you're talking about with Christine. And when you want to like do something more masculine and get aggression out, like I've been using, and I bought an electric guitar, and I've been using metal as like a good way to let aggression out in a mindful way. So that's been kind of a cool practice.
Yeah, it's very cool. Yeah. I think the underlying lesson from all that we can take is like, man, I think sometimes we get in our heads as men, and certainly women as well, but speaking to more of the men side of things, we just get in our head and we judge, and we judge it up against, some type of outdated masculine paradigm,
Well, that's the thing. If I can just jump in, because you're talking about like the heart space and being in the heart, and the ironic part is like, because of society conditioning, like we're like, oh no, I don't want to do that. But if you've ever been connected with your heart, you know how good it feels. So it's like so weird that we're still, but
which goes back to the first third of your book, which is like working against our programming,
exactly,
because it's like, I know intellectually that this is, or even more in my heart, that it's going to feel good once I get into it. But man, I feel, there's something there. Like maybe this is not what a normal guy would do, or I just have to be aware of that, not judge it, and continue to say yes to trying anything. I've done sound baths, and some of it is amazing. Other things are not my thing, but that I would rather be that guy, or work with that type of guy, or be friends with that guy who's open to trying everything, versus just shutting down and be like, no, all that stuff is bogus. Like, I'm just going to keep, and not doing the integration, essentially, totally. So I love it, but we could keep chatting, but I think this is good for now, in the sense that you've given us a taste for what's in the book, a good sneak peek, if you will. And I think it's the next step, obviously, is just letting people know where can they read it? Where can they, is it on Audible at all? Is it on
Not yet. Audible will come at some point, but it's on Amazon. You can grab it there. Paperback, Kindle, hard copy, whatever your heart desires. Soul Life Balance. The website is soullifebalancebook.com.
Awesome.
And if you guys are new into spirituality and you're feeling lost with all the spiritual terms and jargon and all that, like I built a glossary of terms for the newly activated. So like 50 terms that are defined for like those new into spirituality, and you can check that out. It's completely free at soulseekers.com/terms.
Yeah. And I saw that on your link tree on Instagram as well, which I was curious to ask you. So I'm glad you brought that up. Maybe it's one of those things that we could organize, where however long, people could just call into a, some type of group call, and just before they go to bed, and just let you read the book to us, just to go to bed while we're listening to you.
Bedtime stories,
right?
You got it. I started reading like little sections on my Instagram. I'll probably be doing that. Is your book on Audible?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, it's pending. It's pending as of this moment. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We'll talk offline, but yeah, I definitely have plans to get in on Audible. That's not like the top priority.
Yeah.
Your book is pretty big too. I'm not sure how big yours is, but this one's over 300 pages in like normal small font. So it's going to be a long read.
Yeah. That was honestly, that was a bear of a task to put it on Audible, but once you get it done, man, it feels good. Talk about like birthing a project.
Yeah. And as a podcaster having a book, you kind of have to have it on Audible, right?
Yeah. But it's a big investment, time and money and everything else. But it's good. I'm listening to one of my buddies' books, and it's so great. Like literally went for a 2-hour ride today on my bike and listened to his book, and it's so much better. I just don't take the time to sit down and read as often as I'd like to. So it's a good option, but that's awesome. Why I highly encourage you guys to follow Sam on Instagram, on the social medias, to buy the book, especially right now. It's it's
like $8.88 on a paperback, $3.33 on a Kindle. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. That's awesome. Or you can get a hardcover.
Yeah, I just put the hardcovers out. So those are $22.22.
Dude, killer. I love it. I love it. Well, thank you, brother. Thank you for being on. Thanks for sharing your wisdom and your gifts with us. I'm excited to have many more conversations, but you just got to write another book, I guess. So
get on here, Johnny.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Awesome, you guys. Well, thanks again for listening. Hope you enjoyed the content. Like I said, please give Sam a follow, grab his book. Leave a review for him. I think all that stuff, as you did for me when I brought my book out, makes all the world of difference, and helps tell Amazon and everyone else where to invest their resources. So that would be huge. And thanks for listening. We'll catch up with you on the next episode of the Becoming Kings podcast. Take care.